Good evening, this is Brown at I've Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about Avengers West Coast Annual number 5 from 1990. And the first story in this issue is When Titans Trash, and it was, in fact, chapter 4 of the Terminus Factor. It was written by Roy and Dan Thomas and illustrated by Jim Fry and Keith Williams. And this particular chapter, the stakes have gotten a lot more intense this time around, namely because of the fact that, as you can see on the cover here, you've got not one but two colossal titans squaring off with one another, and the outcome of this scuffle could result in if not global annihilation, at the very least, a good amount of damage to, a lot of the planet. And so the Avengers on the West Coast get together to try and basically prevent the two creatures from duking it out. And it's sort of a makeshift team in this case. You've got some regular team members at the time, including Iron Man, who has faced Terminus in one form or another in a couple of the prior chapters of the Terminus Factor. And you also have individuals like the Wasp, Hank Pym, Wonder Man, Hawkeye, and you even have a few guest stars, including Machine Man and the original Human Torch, who was not Johnny Storm from the Fantastic Four, but was in fact an android, and which was created around World War II. And so you have characters like that showing up, as well as Quicksilver, who is able to lend a hand. Oh, and you also have a U.S. agent who was a member of the team at the time. And this particular makeshift team, they're actually able to do a pretty good job of distracting the two titans, if you will, through scientific means as devised by Dr. Hank Pym. And basically, you see how once you have characters who are skilled in their field of science, and then you have the natural leaders of the team kind of calling the shots. You see how even such a makeshift team thrown together at kind of the last minute can at least provide a distraction to an overwhelming force. But unfortunately, though, things get to where the two titans end up following their own alien logic, and Terminus ends up consuming Termini, who is basically made up of multiple Termini organisms, but had grown into a duplicate of its father, if you will. And at the end of the fight, Terminus literally consumes Termini. And when the smoke clears, this makeshift team of heroes is basically left with a new organism, a new form of Terminus, if you will. And whereas Terminus himself was 150 feet tall, now that he's absorbed and consumed the Termini Titan, with whom he was fighting initially, now Terminus not only has 6 limbs, but is now, instead of 150 feet tall, 300 feet tall, and basically the amount of raw power that this thing has, it's enough to basically put this team of the Avengers just out to pasture. And this particular chapter ends with Captain America, She-Hulk, the Vision, and Quasar, who was the last individual to square off against Terminus and defeat him. It ends with these individuals sort of coming together at a different part of the country, and trying to come up with a plan, which will, I'm guessing, be revealed in the final chapter after this one. And so this was actually a pretty intense story, and seeing as how it was written by Roy and Dan Thomas, the guys who have written the previous chapters of the Terminus Factor, there's a good amount of continuity and consistency with previous events. And I liked how even though there was a focus on the regular members of the Avengers West Coast, they also had just enough of a focus on some of the guest stars, namely Quicksilver and Human Torch, as well as Machine Man. And so basically the characters in here all get a chance to shine. And I appreciated also how Hank Pym was basically given a chance to show his skills, not only in science but in also coordinating with the team members, and using his scientific skills in the area of combat. Namely, he's able to help create a or put together a device that certain members of the Avengers team will be able to use to distract the monsters from fighting each other. And you see just how skilled the guy is, and the fact that he was able to come up with something like that in a hurried amount of time shows just how good the guy was. And I thought that was actually a pretty cool bit of trial by fire, if you will. And yeah, so and you also saw how I also like how you saw that in certain parts of the world there's environmental damage coming about from the two monsters fighting each other, and you realize that the final result of this fight will basically have devastating consequences for not only the Avengers team but the world over. And I also I liked how you got a little bit more of a glimpse into the mindset of Terminus and Termini, if you will. You basically, I mean, yeah, you can tell that they're evil aliens from outer space, but there's a certain logic that on one hand it's foreign to us, but it makes sense to them. And I actually like it when a creative team is able to basically create a level of threat that is something other than, say, mustache twirling evil. And in this case, you have even though it's in a superhero comic, brightly colored figures duking it out with each other, there is a certain amount of cosmic horror at hand, because these creatures, I mean, they look like your usual comic book supervillains, giant monsters and what have you, or giant humanoid monsters. But at the same time, though, because they're acting out a vendetta that was from aeons ago, I mean, and they have their own reasons for doing what they're doing, and all of humanity is just beneath them. I mean, you really do get that cosmic horror vibe, albeit, clad in, 90s, action superhero extravaganza stuff. So, yeah, this was a good, chapter in the Terminus Factor. So I'm going to go ahead and give When Titans Trash 4 out of 5 stars. It was good. Also, of course, the artwork was very well done as well. And I neglected to mention that initially. My apologies. But yeah. So anyway, yeah, it was a consistently good chapter, along with the chapters that came before it. So yeah, good job. All right. So the next story is another edition of Media Watch. Which is, something that's been popping up in the previous chapters as well, in which, you're basically, seeing, courtesy of multiple news outlets, what's been going on, with the Terminus invasion. And so you kind of have this, person on the ground, or at least Joe Blow at watching TV at home perspective. And so this particular chapter of Media Watch was by Rob Toka, and the artwork was by Jim Reddington and Keith Williams. And this was a particular chapter of Media Watch that left me a little bit wanting, because that in the chapters of the Terminus Factor beforehand, in the corresponding Media Watch segments, you really had this impending sense of dread that was just building up and building up, because not only were you getting a sort of man on the ground, Joe Blow at home, perspective with, this alien invasion, and that really felt like a genuine threat to humankind. And so even though you're getting a recap, they did a good job of, basically writing it as if you yourself at home were watching TV and, getting breaking news. And so this particular segment of Media Watch, in my opinion at least, wasn't as good because they weren't focusing on the impending dread, and they more or less try to go with comedy for some reason. And now this might have been good if this had been like the one segment of Media Watch that we had seen within the whole Terminus Factor storyline, but because of the prior segments of Media Watch, beforehand, we're kind of left to compare, this particular, segment with the other segments. And the reason I say they focus more on humor this time around is because you have bumbling politicians throwing in their 2 cents, and you also have crackpot conspiracy theorists coming in and basically throwing in all sorts of whacked out ideas as to what's going on. And then you have like this one politician who basically is trying to keep the whole thing together, but everyone just keeps talking in circles and embracing the more sensational tabloid like allegations of what's going on with this alien invasion, and he's just left hanging his head and like I should have stayed home in bed for instead of going to work today, that kind of attitude, if you will. And so I guess you could say, I'm not going to say it was a good particular segment, and I did get a chuckle out of it because it kind of reminded me of how there are some people who blame every bizarre event on aliens, and you had a couple of people popping up in here saying aliens, more or less, but except in this case it actually does stem from aliens. So I kind of got a chuckle out of that, but at the same time I guess some of the satire they were using just fell a little flat for me, simply because they had done a good job with the media watch segments beforehand, and there was a certain mood and tone established, and so I guess this sudden direction of humor, without any sort of gradual transition, just was kind of a "what are you doing here" type of feeling, like it felt out of place. So I'm going to give this particular segment of Media Watch 2 out of 5 stars. It was okay. It didn't really add anything to the story, unlike the other segments of Media Watch. So, not really worth, thinking about. Probably not going to think about it afterwards. Okay, excuse me. All right, so the third story is called Tanks for Nothing, and it's a standalone story that's, entirely independent of the Terminus Factor storyline. And it was written by Gary Barnum and illustrated by Brad Vancata. And this particular story, one of the central characters is a reserve member of the Avengers, a woman named Firebird, who has pyrotechnic abilities, and as her name would suggest, and she's at a sort of a SeaWorld type exhibit, to check out the whales, and do, while they do their tricks and what have you. But this particular show, it's disrupted by this group of Atlantean mutants called Surf. And Surf, by the way, was introduced in a storyline that was company-wide at around this time, called Atlantis Attacks, and they were introduced in the New Mutants annual that the Atlantis Attacks took place in, and they were co-created by Rob Liefeld, of all people. So anyway, though, this small group of Atlantean mutants, basically, in this particular story, they've been taking it upon themselves to go to, these sort of aquatic exhibits, across the world, and free all these animals these sea animals in captivity. So they, because according to them, basically, they're, slaves to the whims of humanity, in the sense that they're performing, tricks for food and things like that. And so, Firebird, she's able to summon, help from some of the other Avengers, West Coast branch, and they are able to. They're able to put up a fight against the group against Surf, and eventually they're able to say, okay, truce, what's going on here, and they get the perspective of what Surf is trying to do, and and on the other hand, they're saying, well, okay, yeah, we sympathize with you wanting to help endangered species, but at the same time, we can't have you going around to see places like SeaWorld and causing property damage, or potentially endangering innocent civilians. And so they kind of come to a truce, and they get the animals in this particular exhibit out to sea, and they and they kind of come to an understanding, that hey, maybe, they had a good idea, but hey, there are other ways to go about it, essentially. And so this particular story, it kind of brought me back. It took me back to the storyline Mobility, or I'm sorry, it took me back to the story from Iron Man Annual, the Iron Man annual that the Terminus Factor was taking place in, and the backup story called Mobility, and it kind of made me think of that story in the sense that it was like they were, trying to make, a political, or at least, sociological, statement, but the way they went about it, though, it felt very out of place, and, just kind of, hollow. And I'm not sure if this was something that was going on, in the 80s or 90s in terms of, trying to raise awareness for, endangered sea animals, or specifically, whales. I'm sure it was, because I remember reading like a lot of zoo books from that time period, and they talked a lot about endangered species, and stuff that needs to be done to help them, things like that. But the way that they tackled the issue in this particular story, it was one of those things where you could tell that the intent, it was a good intention, to raise awareness for the issue, but the way that the characters were written, it just felt very, it didn't really feel a lot like how people would talk in this kind of situation. I mean, granted, this is the Marvel Universe, not real life necessarily, but at the same time, they're trying to address a real life concern. And the way they talked, it kind of made me think of, remember those G.I. Joe commercials, from, where it's like, knowing is half the battle, G.I. Joe, and all that. It kind of made me think of that, which, I mean, yeah, there's some nostalgic fondness for that, but at the same time, though, you get older, and it's like, yeah, I mean, those are kind of cheesy, but, I mean, they're geared towards kids, I know, but, it's like, imagine that, but, you're reading it, from a comic to where it's, like, not necessarily, geared towards little kids, but, towards, I guess, an older audience, if you will. I mean, not like a mature readers only audience, but at the same time, it's like this, this particular story. I mean, it's taking place, in an annual, which has a sort of cosmic horror story front and center, which isn't exactly kid stuff. And so then you have this particular public service type story, which is written, like it's, it was something for little kids. And so it just felt kind of lame. I mean, I liked what they were trying to say, I guess, in a sense that, animals are, oftentimes, forced to entertain humans, just, to be able to survive, in some places. But it's just that the way that the message was carried out, it just felt very, cheesy and, childish. And so, also the artwork, I don't know, it just, I mean, it was okay. It wasn't anything to write home about necessarily. But I think it was like, it felt like they were trying to imitate, in some instances, Rob Liefeld's art. And I understand that, they were doing so because he was the guy who created the surf team. But at the same time, it's like when all the other characters have the sort of, Liefeld look to them, as opposed to, say, the tried and true artistic depictions that have been done in, the Terminus Factor, chapters so far. It just felt kind of like it looked like something that, a teenager would draw in a way, or at least a younger individual, would draw, because, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff happening, but it looked kind of, it looked like, something that, it was an audition as opposed to, say, something that was done by a tried and true professional. But, like I said, I'm not sure if that was because they were just trying to, imitate Rob Liefeld's art, because he was the guy who had previously illustrated Surf. But yeah, just the artwork just feels kind of, juvenile, if you will. Sorry. So, but yeah, I'm going to go ahead and give, Tanks for Nothing, 2 out of 5 stars. It was okay. Nothing to write home about. Okay, so now the 4th story is called Don't You Dare Miss It, which sounds rather ominous. It was written by Dwayne McDuffie, a pretty good comic book writer in my opinion, and it was illustrated by Grant Miehm. And this was an interesting story because, it was overall a comedy, but there was also a certain, I'm not going to say it was a message, but it does give you food for thought. Namely, a small group from the Avengers West Coast, consisting of Iron Man, let's see, I don't remember if Wonder Man was here, but U.S. Agent, Wonder Man was there. I remember now. Iron Man, Wonder Man, U.S. Agent, Hawkeye, and the Vision, and basically, they're trying to, do Wonder Man a solid because, he was apparently supposed to do sort of like this, charity function at a monster truck rally, but the movie that he's in, because he's an actor, when he's not a superhero, but the movie he's in, is getting, scheduling delays. And so, he's like, hey guys, I'm not going to be able to do his charity thing. Can you all, help me out here? And so, the, Iron Man, Vision, Hawkeye, and U.S. Agent, they end up, going to this charity function at a monster truck rally. And, they're like, dude, this guy owes us big time, because it's like, hey, I know we got to do stuff for the fans every now and then, but at the same time, hey, there's so much more we could be doing with our skill set, But then things take a rather unusual turn when all the machinery, namely the monster trucks and a lot of the mechanical devices start attacking the audience. And you find out that it's being caused by this individual who, is this newfound, supervillain who claims to have the ability to talk to machines, and he's saying that, humanity is exploiting, the machines and, not caring about the spirits within. So, I mean, it's like mystical mumbo jumbo, but then you find out that actually I should say you find out, but Hawkeye, he basically is able to do some quick detective work on his feet, and he finds out that this guy doesn't have any sort of mystic abilities, but he's actually a mutant who has the ability to control machines, but because he doesn't really know what he is or how to adequately use his abilities, it's like the chaos of it, and it basically kind of just overwhelms him, and the chaos sort of takes on this form of all this internal chatter in his head, because it's like he's already thinking his own thoughts, but at the same time he's got all these energy currents from the machines running around in his head, and basically he's just under the mistaken impression that he's talking to the machines, and since they're talking to him, they're calling out for his help. And so that's why he initially went on this crusade to free machines from humanity. But the reason he went to this monster truck rally is because he was wanting to get exposure. And when Wonder Man didn't show up, but these 4 Avengers showed up instead, the guy's plans are kind of, ruffled, but at the same time, he just goes with it. And next thing this group of Avengers is, having to literally, take on monster trucks, that have come to life. And Iron Man's having to try and fight against himself, before his armor ends up taking U.S. agent's head off. And so, but no, when Hawkeye, though, when he's able to sort of, sneak to where, this, villain is, and he's able to, tell him what's really going on, the guy kind of has a nervous breakdown and, surrenders on the spot. And so they save the day, and, they're saying, okay, well, who are we going to, charge all this to? Because there's been a lot of property damage. No loss of life, thankfully, though. But, Hawkeye's like, I could think of a guy. Namely, they're going to, you get the implication that they're going to charge it all to, Wonder Man's account, because, hey, this numbskull was the guy who was supposed to be here in the first place, not us. So this was actually a fun little story. I was initially thinking that, when they brought in the villain, and with the whole, machine spirits angle, I was thinking, this is like, I felt like they were, ripping off of, Warhammer 40K, except, this was kind of, Warhammer 40K wasn't that prevalent, back then as, say it was, now. So I highly doubt that they were, trying to riff on Warhammer 40K, because they have this, this whole thing called machine spirits. But anyway, though, it starts off, I felt like they were, it was kind of a cheesy concept. But then, you had, the simple solution that, no, this guy's not, a mystical supervillain. He's just a mutant who doesn't understand his powers. And so, it was a simple solution. It was just say, hey, crazy, events, transpiring. It was a mutant. It was a simple solution, but at the same time, within the context of this Marvel Universe setting, the fact that there are mutants running around with, powers that they can't understand or control half the time, is a solution that makes a lot of sense. And I also appreciated how the guy the group that's at this monster truck rally, it's like, I liked also how you got this whole bit of they're being professional, they're entertaining the fans, but at the same time, you as a reader, that they do not want to be there. And it's like, they have no desire to be at a monster truck rally when they could, be, doing something a little more substantial. But, because of, the mix-up in scheduling, they end up, preventing, a threat from getting worse than it was. And they also end up, getting to the root of this threat's problem. And I also liked how, it was the one guy in the group who, arguably had the least amount of, combat power, namely Hawkeye. It was him who was able to talk the guy down. And, it just basically shows you just how, good at, how good of a people person, Clint Barton is in the comics. And anyway, and so yeah, it was a fun story. I liked the humor, and I liked the little twist with the guy being a mutant rather than something mystical. But I also liked how Vision, who is an android, was basically pondering some of what this villain was saying about machine spirits, and how machines are being exploited by humanity. And so while he definitely is with his comrades in the sense that they need to stop this threat from getting worse than it was, I do like how Vision was genuinely pondering what this guy was saying, even though it's proven that the guy's going crazy because of his lack of understanding of his own abilities. I liked how some of it kind of, resonated with Vision, because he himself is a machine and has some form of sentience, and sometimes he feels exploited by humanity, but at the same time he's also loyal to certain members of humanity as well. So I liked that little facet of the character of Vision that was touched upon in this story that was other than that rather humorous. So I'm going to go ahead and give Don't You Dare Miss It 4 out of 5 stars. It was a nice pleasant fun story. And so the very last story in this issue was let's see if I can say it. It's a long title. Honey, I Shrunk the Hyperatomic Anti-Proton Cannon. And so obviously that title is a riff off of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. But it was written by Carrie Barre, and it was illustrated by James Fry and Chris Ivey. And so this is another story that goes for comedy, and in this case, it's a group of the West Coast Avengers are coming back from a prior engagement. No, not the Terminus Factor. This story is completely independent of the Terminus Factor. But anyway, they're coming back from a prior engagement, and Scarlet Witch is with them because she was one of the members at the time. And anyway, though, they get to their base, and they're winding down, they're relaxing. But then Hank Pym, he runs up to him, and he's kind of freaking out. And he's saying, don't come any closer, don't come any further into this room, because it turns out that he had, accidentally shrunken the hyperatomic anti-proton cannon. Excuse me, sorry. And it turns out he was working with this technology that was used to shrink objects, and he was experimenting with it. And unfortunately, this little experiment kind of went out of control, and it ended up shrinking this particular cannon. And basically, if this cannon is activated, it can level a city block. And so it's kind of like mad scientist much, Hank Pym. And so and Wonder Man, is standing in the middle of the room, chowing down, this big bowl of chips, because it turns out that he was in the room when this thing got shrunken, and Hank Pym was telling him, hey, do not lift one foot up, don't move, don't go forward, don't go backwards, stay right where it planted, right where you are, because you stamp on this thing, bad things will happen. And so you have this little squad of the Avengers, basically being forced to play this sort of almost Marco Polo, crossed with hide and seek, in terms of trying to find this darn thing, which is shrunken down to like less than the size of less than a bite-sized toy. And the funny thing is like, I mean, they're commenting about how ridiculous this whole situation is, and and basically they're having to scrounge around, get on all fours trying to find this darn thing. And the funny thing is they actually find a number of other items that had actually been shrunken by Hank Pym in prior experiments. And Hank's he's like, I was wondering where those got to, little things like that. But what ends up happening is they do end up finding that proton cannon. And bad news for Wonder Man, this said cannon somehow found its way into the bowl of chips that he's been chowing down on. And so right when he's getting the last bunch of chips, he ends up swallowing the darn thing, and there's a rather explosive result. And you have to wonder what kind of internal damage this does to the poor guy, but thankfully, because he's Wonder Man, he can take it. And so, he's just kind of left on the ground with a fierce tummy ache, and he's like, Hank, I found it. So, I mean, it wasn't like, an overly, thought-provoking story or anything like that, but it was just kind of a funny, Saturday morning cartoons type of, standalone story, which, I thought, it was, some harmless fun. Well, okay, maybe not so harmless to Wonder Man, except, well, literally, he's Wonder Man, he can take it. Yeah, he can eat a miniaturized, weapon that can level a city block, and, other than a, brief tummy ache, he'll be fine. I mean, other than that, though, no harm done. But, I mean, it was amusing just, seeing, these, somewhat, heavy hitters of the Avengers team trying to, look around on all fours on the floor, and, for something that was, basically the size of a toy. And, I did like how, Hank Pym, it was this story was contrasting, his depiction, in the first story in this annual, wherein, he was a very, very level-headed, very, intelligent, scientist. But here, though, he has kind of a scatterbrained moment, and, you just, it was just funny seeing him, one way in the first story, but then, somewhat of an opposite in this story, in the sense that he's the guy who, screwed up and, is basically having to explain the ridiculous nature of the situation to his, teammates. But anyway, though, I'll go ahead and give Honey, I Shrunk the Hyperatomic Proton Cannon 3 out of 5 stars. It was decent, not bad, not great, but it was fun, a little bit of harmless fun. Yeah, that was the Avengers West Coast Annual 5, and it was, I mean, with the main story, with the Terminus Factor tie-in, things continue at a good pace. And the standalone stories were kind of a mixed bag, but I mean, they were for the most part, harmless fun, which kind of contrasted with the serious nature, or at least the more ominous nature of the main story. So it was an interesting little book. So yeah, that was my take on Avengers West Coast Annual 5. Thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. If you got any questions, comments, let me know. Y'all have a good night. Bye.